The smell of glazed ham and warm rolls was still hanging in the dining room when my sister looked across the Thanksgiving table and said, "Still alone, Nora? Maybe next year you'll finally bring someone home so we can stop pretending your old room isn't just permanent storage." A few people smiled into their glasses. One of my cousins looked down at his plate. I set my fork beside the napkin and did not answer right away. I remember the sound of ice shifting in someone's water glass and the low hum from the kitchen where the warming trays had been left on. I also remember the phone resting beside my hand, screen dark, and a small gold envelope I had seen months earlier and never forgot. That was the moment the evening changed, though no one else at the table knew it yet. My name is Nora Whitaker. I was 36 that year, and I worked in corporate compliance in Seattle. Most of my days were spent reviewing risk reports, tracing gaps, documenting what other people hoped would stay buried inside process notes and approval chains. It was quiet work, careful work, the kind of work my family liked to describe as technical when they wanted to dismiss it without admitting they didn't understand it. Thanksgiving was at my parents' house outside Phoenix, in one of those polished neighborhoods where every driveway looked staged and every front entry had some kind of seasonal arrangement that no one actually touched. My mother, Celeste, cared about presentation more than comfort. The glasses had been lined up before noon. The place cards were handwritten. Even the candles looked chosen for effect rather than light. My older sister, Vanessa, moved through that house as if it had always belonged more to her than to anyone else. She had that smooth kind of confidence that plays well in a room full of people who already want to be impressed. Her husband, Colin, sat beside her in a pressed sport coat, smiling at the right times, adding little remarks whenever he sensed an opening. Together they had built the kind of life my mother could explain to her friends with satisfaction. Brand partnerships, new listings, event photos, renovation plans, public proof. I had arrived that afternoon with one carry-on bag, a pie from a bakery near my hotel, and no expectation that anything would be different from every other family holiday. That part is important. I was not walking into the house hoping to be chosen. I was only observing. Before dinner, I had stood near the kitchen island while my mother adjusted a centerpiece that did not need adjusting. She glanced at me and said, "Vanessa has had such a full season. Between the campaign work and all the events, she's exhausted. Try not to bring anything heavy to the table tonight." I remember folding the cardboard pie box flat and setting it neatly into the recycling bin before I answered. I wasn't planning to. She nodded as if we had reached an understanding, though what she meant was simpler than that. Do not disrupt the version of the family she preferred. By the time we sat down, the room had settled into its usual pattern. My father carved. My mother managed the pace of the meal. Vanessa told stories designed to travel the full length of the table. Colin added texture where needed. I was asked about my flight, my apartment, whether Seattle still felt temporary, and then, as always, whether there was anyone special. There usually was not much point in answering those questions honestly. My family only liked information they could place into a shape they recognized. So when Vanessa gave that small smile and made her comment about my old room, I let the silence sit for a second. Then I put my phone face up on the table and said, as evenly as I could, "I'm married." The room did not erupt. It went still. My mother's fork tapped her plate. My father stopped cutting. Vanessa blinked once, then laughed in a short, careful way, like she had not yet decided whether I was joking or embarrassing myself. "Married," she said. "Nora to who?" I looked at her, then at the phone between us. "To Daniel," I said. "We got married in February." No one spoke for a moment after that. I could hear the soft tick of the wall clock in the hallway and the faint rattle of the air vent near the back doors. Colin leaned back in his chair and stared at me with open disbelief. My mother's face had changed in a way I recognized immediately. Not concern. Not joy. Calculation. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "We would have known." I folded my hands in my lap. "Yes," I said. "You should have." Then I waited. No one reached for the serving dishes after that. My mother was the first to recover. She set her napkin down carefully and gave me the kind of tight smile she used when she was trying to pull a room back under control. "Nora," she said, "if this is your way of making a point, It's not funny. I'm not making a point, I said. I'm answering the question. Vanessa gave a small laugh, but there was strain in it now. She picked up her wine glass and turned it once by the stem without drinking. You expect us to believe you got married and just forgot to mention it? I didn't forget. That landed harder than I expected. My father looked up then. Not sharply. Just enough for me to see that he understood there was a difference between silence and omission, and that I was pointing to it. The dining room had gone very quiet in that particular family way where everyone stays still because they can feel something shifting, but no one wants to be the first to acknowledge it. The chandelier light reflected off the silverware. Someone at the far end cleared their throat. From the kitchen, I could hear the dishwasher running from the first round of prep bowls my mother had already loaded before we sat down. Colin leaned forward on his elbows. So when exactly did this happen? February, I said. In Seattle. Small ceremony. Daniel's parents came in from Denver. A few close friends were there. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. And you just didn't tell your own family. I looked at her for a moment before answering. I did tell you. Just not in the way you're pretending not to remember. My mother turned toward me fully now. Nora enough. But I had already crossed the point where enough meant anything. I reached for my water glass, took a sip, and set it down. My hands were steady. That was one of the things years of compliance work had taught me. If you have records, you do not need volume. If you have a timeline, you do not need theater. I send invitations for reception, I said. Not for the ceremony itself. That part was private. But 6 months ago, I mailed 12 invitations to this house. Certified. Signature required. My father frowned. 12. One for each household on Mom's side. One for each household on yours. I had them all sent here because this address was still the easiest central point for family mailings. My mother stared at me as if I had started speaking a language she did not like. We never received anything. I shifted my gaze to Vanessa. She had gone very still. It was a small thing, maybe invisible to anyone who did not know her well. Her shoulders stopped moving. Her fingers, which had been playing with the base of her glass, flattened against the tablecloth. I had seen that posture before when we were teenagers, and she was trying to decide whether denial would hold. Colin noticed it too. I could tell by the way his expression changed. Not yet suspicion, just attention. I tracked every envelope, I said. All 12 were delivered on the same morning in May. Signed for at 10:18 a.m. Vanessa let out a short breath through her nose. You're doing that thing again. What thing? This. She made a small motion with her hand, vague and irritated. Building some weird little case file out of normal life. People sign for packages all the time. Yes, I said. They do. Then I waited. That was always the useful part. Not the accusation. The silence after it. My Aunt Elise, my father's sister, was seated 3 chairs down. She had been quiet most of the evening, which was normal for her in that house. She never rushed into a conversation there. She observed first. She had a way of touching the rim of her glass with one finger when she was thinking, and she was doing that now. My mother looked from me to Vanessa and back again. If something came, it must have been misplaced. Possibly, I said. Vanessa sat up straighter. Exactly. Thank you. That's what I'm saying. Packages get mixed in all the time. Samples come here. Campaign mailers. Colin's documents. Holiday catalogs. You send some dramatic gold envelope, and suddenly we're all supposed to remember it like it was a state secret. There it was. The gold envelope. I had not mentioned the color. Colin turned his head toward her. Vanessa realized it a second too late. I saw it happen on her face. The tiny pause. The recalculation. My mother saw it too and looked down at her plate. I kept my voice level. I didn't say anything about gold. Nobody spoke. The dishwasher in the kitchen clicked into a louder cycle. Somewhere outside, through the closed windows, a dog barked once and then stopped. Vanessa tried to smile, but it came out thin. Well, I assumed. You've always liked that formal kind of thing. I nodded once. That's interesting, I said. Because the return packaging was custom. The envelopes were hand-addressed. They came from a stationer in Seattle I've used for audit dinners and retirement events. Not the kind of thing anyone would guess unless they had seen them. Colin leaned back slowly. He did not look at me. He looked at his wife. My father put his knife down. Nora, he said carefully, are you telling us Vanessa signed for your invitations? I'm saying the signature on the delivery confirmation matches hers. My mother spoke too quickly. That proves nothing. It proves someone at this house received them, I said. And it proves they were not lost in transit. Vanessa laughed again, but there was no ease left in it. This is absurd. Even if I signed for some envelopes, that doesn't mean I opened them or hid them. I looked at her. I know. She blinked. You know? Yes, I said. That part took longer. For the first time all evening, Aunt Elise leaned in. What do you mean, she asked, longer. I turned slightly toward her. It means I didn't come here tonight with only a postal receipt. The room changed again after that. Not loudly, just enough. People shifted in their seats. My youngest cousin lowered his phone to the table. My father's jaw tightened. My mother looked at me the way she used to when I was a child and had quietly corrected something she wanted left alone. I had spent 6 months deciding whether any of this was worth proving. Not because I doubted what happened. I knew what happened by the end of May. But proof changes a story. Once you can place an event in order, once you can connect one missing document to another, people lose the option of calling it a misunderstanding. And there had been other things. Not just the invitations. A scholarship letter when I was 17. A message from a recruiter during college. A card from a landlord when I was looking for my first apartment out of state. Small interruptions, all of them easy to dismiss alone. Too tidy to notice if you still wanted to believe in coincidence. But patterns are what I do. I looked down at my phone, then back up. I didn't say anything in May because I wanted to be certain, I said. Step 1 was delivery confirmation. Step 2 was timeline. Step 3 was whether this had happened before. Vanessa pushed back her chair an inch. Oh my God. No, I said. Not that. Just order. My mother drew in a breath like she wanted to stop me, but she didn't. Maybe she could feel that the room no longer belonged to her. Maybe she understood, finally, that presentation does not survive contact with sequence. Aunt Elise folded her hands. And were you certain? I met her eyes. Yes, I said. By August. Then I picked up my phone and unlocked it. I did not slide the phone across the table right away. I let the screen light my hand for a second, then set it beside my plate again. That small pause mattered. In rooms like that, people often tell on themselves while waiting for the evidence. They start filling the silence with explanations no one asked for. Vanessa did exactly that. This is insane, she said. You came to Thanksgiving with some kind of presentation? No, I said. I came with records. Colin turned toward her. Vanessa. What? You said you never saw anything. I didn't say that. I said I sign for things all the time. That isn't the same answer. My mother cut in before Vanessa had to respond. This has gone far enough. Nora, whatever you think you found, this is not the time. I looked at her. You're right. The time would have been May. That stayed with the room. My father sat back slowly, one hand still resting on the table near his untouched glass. He looked tired in a way I had seen before but never really named. Not tired from work. Tired from years of choosing the smaller discomfort in the moment and getting the larger damage later. I opened a folder on my phone and turned the screen toward Aunt Elise first. She was the only person there I trusted to read quietly before reacting. The first image was the postal confirmation. 12 items. 1 address. Delivered May 14th at 10:18 a.m. signature captured. The second image was a still frame from the exterior camera mounted above my parents' garage. Not from my parents' system. From the house across the street. That had taken longer. In June, after I realized the invitations had not simply gone unanswered, I had called my parents' neighbors, the Donovans, to ask a harmless question about an old holiday card list my mother once kept. Mrs. Donovan and I had always been on decent terms. She mentioned, casually, that they had upgraded their security cameras in the spring after a package theft on the block. I asked what date that had happened. She told me. It was a week after my delivery date. That was enough to make me ask one more question. Do your recordings go back to mid-May? By luck and storage settings, part of that week had still been archived. Mrs. Donovan had not known what I was looking for at first. Then she watched the clip with me on a video call. Vanessa was in the driveway at 10:19 that morning. She had a stack of envelopes in one hand and her phone in the other. She looked at the top piece, paused, then walked into the side garage entrance instead of the front door. A normal movement if you did not know the timing. Not normal if you did. Aunt Elise looked at the screen for a long moment, then handed the phone back to me without a word. Vanessa's face had lost its color. "You got surveillance footage from the neighbors?" I asked a question, I said. Then I verified a timeline. That is such a violation. I almost smiled at that, but didn't. So is signing for someone else's mail and not delivering it. Colin held out his hand. "Let me see." I passed him the phone. He studied the first image, then the second. His expression didn't crack all at once. It changed in stages. First concentration, then recognition, then the thin, private alarm of a person realizing a story he had been living inside may not be arranged the way he thought. My mother looked at him instead of at me. "Colin." He didn't answer her. He zoomed in slightly on the image and looked at Vanessa. "Why were you taking mail through the garage?" he asked. Vanessa crossed her arms. "I don't know. Maybe I had shopping bags in the other hand. Maybe I was sorting things. It was 6 months ago. You only have envelopes in your hand." She said nothing. He kept looking at her. "And you said you never saw them." My father finally spoke. "Vanessa." He said her name quietly, but it had weight in it now. She looked at him, then at me, and I saw the first real flash of anger under the panic. Not guilt, not shame, anger that the usual arrangement had failed. Anger that facts had entered a room where she normally only had to manage impressions. "This is exactly what she does," Vanessa said, turning slightly toward the far end of the table as if appealing to an audience. "She turns everything into a case, into evidence, into some cold little spreadsheet so she can act superior." "No," Aunt Elise said. It was the first time she had spoken directly into the conflict. Vanessa stopped. Aunt Elise's voice was calm, almost gentle. She turned it into a timeline because none of you listened when it was only pain. No one moved after that. The sentence settled over the table with more force than shouting would have had. My mother looked down. My father rubbed once at his forehead. Colin handed the phone back to me as though it had become heavier than he expected. I placed it beside my plate again. Then I took one breath and continued. "The camera footage confirmed receipt," I said. But it didn't tell me where the invitations went after that. So I kept going. Vanessa let out a sharp sound. "Of course you did." "Yes," I said, because I remembered something. I looked at my mother then. 2 days after the delivery, you called me. You asked whether I had chosen a stationer yet for anything formal in my life. I thought it was a strange question. At the time, I ignored it. My mother stared at me. "I didn't remember it until later," I said. "When I started reviewing dates." She opened her mouth, then closed it. My father turned toward her. "Celeste." Her fingers tightened around her napkin. "I saw something in the recycling bin," she said quietly. The room went still again. Vanessa looked at her so fast her chair creaked against the floor. My mother kept her eyes on the table. I was breaking down boxes in the garage that Friday. There were several thick envelopes at the bottom. Cream or gold, I don't know. They had calligraphy on them. I thought they were samples, or leftovers from one of Vanessa's event mailings. I watched her carefully. "Did you read the names?" "No. Did you ask why they were there?" She shook her head once. "No, why not?" That was the question. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just precise. My mother swallowed. Because I didn't want another problem before the Preston fundraiser that weekend. Aunt Elise closed her eyes for a moment. Colin stared at his plate. My father said nothing at all. And Vanessa, for the first time in her life, had nowhere clean to stand. Vanessa pushed her chair back harder this time. The legs scraped across the floor, sharp enough to make 2 of my cousins flinch. "So that's it," she said. "We're doing this now? We're all just going to sit here while Nora turns Thanksgiving into a deposition." "No," I said. "I'm not asking questions anymore." That checked her for a second. I had learned something a long time ago. Confrontation only looks chaotic when no one defines the frame. Once the frame is clear, most people either settle into it or expose themselves fighting it. I folded my napkin once and set it beside my plate. I came here for one reason, I said. Not to argue. Not to embarrass anyone. I came to confirm whether what happened in May was an isolated act or part of a longer pattern. I have my answer. My father looked up at me. Nora. I turned to him. I'm going to say this plainly because I don't want anything misquoted later. Even my mother noticed that word. Later. In my work, I said, when something important goes missing, I don't start with motive. I start with process. Step 1 is receipt. Step 2 is control. Step 3 is disposition. Who received it, who had access to it, and what happened after. Vanessa made a sound of disbelief. You really can't help yourself. I ignored that. Step 1 is finished. The invitations were received here. Step 2 is clear enough. Vanessa signed for them and took them inside through the garage. Step 3 is where intent matters. Were they misplaced or were they concealed? My mother whispered, Nora, please. I looked at her. You already answered part of that. She pressed her lips together. I kept my voice low. You saw custom envelopes with handwriting on them in the recycling bin 2 days later. You didn't ask why. You didn't tell me. You didn't mention it to Dad. You made a decision to leave it alone because there was an event that weekend and you didn't want conflict. My father finally turned toward her fully. It was not a dramatic movement, just slow, deliberate attention. But in that house, attention had always been power. Did you know they were hers? He asked. My mother looked between us, then down at the tablecloth. I suspected. That word settled into the room like dust. Vanessa stood up. This is unbelievable. No, Aunt Elise said quietly. It's actually very believable. Vanessa looked at her with open fury. You've always hated me. Elise did not react. She just rested one hand lightly against the side of her water glass. No, I disliked what was allowed around you. That hit harder than anything I could have said. For years, my aunt had been treated in that family as difficult because she noticed too much and excused too little. Sitting there, watching her hold steady without raising her voice, I understood why I had always trusted her more than the others even when I did not have language for it. Colin stood then too, but only halfway, hands braced against the table. Vanessa, just answer the question. She turned to him. Don't do that. Do what? Take her side in front of everyone. He stared at her for a second. I'm asking whether you threw them away. The room had narrowed down to that. Not the wedding. Not my job. Not the years of small humiliations that had made this kind of evening possible. Just one question. Clear enough that no one could hide inside a broader argument. Vanessa looked around the table and saw, maybe for the first time, that the usual exits were gone. My mother could not smooth this over without admitting what she had ignored. My father could not retreat into silence without choosing a side in public. Colin was no longer playing support. Even the cousins were watching with that unsettled stillness people have when they realize the family story they grew up with was edited. So Vanessa changed tactics. She sat back down. Slowly, carefully. She reached for her wine, then thought better of it and left the glass untouched. When you live in a house like this, she said, things move around. Deliveries pile up. Mail gets mixed in with samples. I might have opened one. I don't remember. If I did, it was a mistake. There it was. The partial step. Not truth. Just a smaller lie. I nodded once. That would matter, I said, if it only happened once. She went still again. My father caught it immediately. What does that mean? I picked up my phone and opened a second folder. There was something else, I said. Not from this year. My hands stayed steady as I scrolled, though I could feel my pulse in my wrists now. Not because I was unsure. Because there is always a cost to naming a pattern in front of the people who benefited from not seeing it. I turned the phone toward my father first this time. It was a scanned letter, dated 11 years earlier. University letterhead. Scholarship committee. Final notice of acceptance into a summer honors program in Boston. Tuition covered. Housing included. Response required by June 12th. My father read the first lines, then the date. His face changed. I never saw this, he said. I know. My voice sounded different to my own ears then. Not shaky, just flatter. I found it 3 months ago because Annalise mentioned it by accident when we were on the phone. She said she had always wondered why I never thanked her for helping with the recommendation. Annalise lowered her eyes for a moment. I asked her what she meant, I said. She told me she had arranged for the letter to be sent here because I was still living at home. She assumed I chose not to go. My mother covered her mouth with her fingers. My father looked up at Vanessa. She did not even pretend confusion this time. That was how I knew we had passed the point of denial. You took that too, he asked. She looked at him with something raw and exhausted in her face now, as if maintaining herself had suddenly become heavier than telling the truth. I was 17, she said. The room stayed silent. She spoke again, more quickly now, with that same old instinct to make urgency sound like innocence. You were going to leave, she said, staring at me. Everyone acted like your future was so bright and so important, and I was the one stuck here listening to Mom talk about grades and internships and what colleges looked good on holiday cards. You were the only person in that house who actually helped me with anything. If you left, I would have been alone with them. My father sat back as if the chair itself had moved under him. My mother looked at Vanessa like she was seeing a stranger and a child at the same time. I heard myself ask, very calmly, so you kept it? Vanessa gave one small nod. Yes. Where? Her eyes flicked toward the hallway leading to the study, then back to me. In the cabinet over the garage, she said. That answer was so specific, so ordinary, that it changed the whole room. This was no longer family tension or a misunderstanding or holiday emotion. It was storage. Placement. A real object put in a real location by a real person making a deliberate choice. Colin sat down slowly, both hands over his mouth for a second before dropping them again. Annalise looked at me, and in her face I saw grief, but also confirmation. She had been carrying part of the story for years without knowing it. I placed my phone on the table and let the silence do its work. Then I said the one thing I had been holding back since August. This is why I don't confuse silence with peace anymore. No one answered. From somewhere near the front of the house, I heard the soft chime of a phone notification. Then another. At first, no one moved toward the sound. The notifications came again, one after another from somewhere in the front hallway, then from the sideboard behind my mother, then faintly from one of the cousins at the far end of the table. It was that particular ripple of modern noise that means the same information has started reaching several people at once. Colin was the first to check. He looked down at his phone, unlocked it, and went completely still. Then he turned the screen face down without saying anything. My mother noticed. What is it? He did not answer right away. Vanessa reached for her own phone. I watched the color drain from her face before she even finished reading. Whatever she saw, she understood it immediately. I sat where I was. The younger cousin on the far end, Paige, looked stricken. I'm sorry, she said softly, almost to herself. I thought it had ended. My father looked from one face to another. Ended. Paige swallowed. I was streaming dinner prep earlier. Just the table and decorations and stuff. I use a private follower list for holiday content. She looked at Vanessa, then at me. I forgot it was still running. No one said anything after that. The house was quiet in a way that felt newly exposed. The clink of dishes from the kitchen was gone. The heat had kicked on again, and I could hear it moving through the vents. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street. Inside, every person at that table understood the same thing at the same time. What had happened in that room was no longer fully contained by the room. My mother pressed one hand to the base of her throat. Oh no. Vanessa stood so abruptly that her chair tipped backward and hit the floor. Turn it off, she snapped. Paige looked close to tears. It is off. Take it down. I ended it, Vanessa. But people already screen record things. Colin closed his eyes for a second. My father remained seated. He looked older than he had an hour earlier. Not broken. Just finally unable to pretend he had not been present for the slow construction of this family's habits. Vanessa started pacing the edge of the dining room, one hand tight around her phone. This is unbelievable. This is such a violation. Nora, this is because of you. I looked at her. No, she stopped. You brought this here. I brought records to a private dinner. Paige streamed the room. You admitted what you admitted on your own. Her eyes flashed. You wanted this. No, I said. I wanted the truth stated clearly. What other people do with it after that is outside my control. That was the moment I felt the shift completely. Not triumph. Not relief. Just order. For most of my life, being in that family meant reacting to other people's moods and trying to prevent escalation before it started. But systems do not work that way. In systems, you do not chase noise. You establish sequence. You separate fact from performance. You decide what belongs to you and what does not. So I stood up. Not quickly. Just enough to mark that I was done sitting inside their version of the evening. My coat was hanging over the back of my chair. I picked it up and draped it over my arm. Nora, my father said, don't leave like this. I turned toward him. I'm not leaving because of what happened in the last 10 minutes, I said. I'm leaving because of what happened over the last 11 years. My mother's eyes filled then, though even in that moment I could not tell how much was grief and how much was fear. We can talk tomorrow. I shook my head once. No, tomorrow is for people who are still confused. And Elise did too. She did not make a scene of it. She just reached for her handbag and placed her napkin beside her plate with the same care she had used all evening. I'm going with Nora. My mother looked wounded by that in a way that almost seemed to surprise her. Elise. But Elise only said, you had enough time. Vanessa had stopped pacing. She was looking at her phone again, refreshing, scanning, calculating. I recognized the expression. It was not remorse. It was impact assessment. Colin saw it too. He looked at her for a long moment and said, very quietly, is that really where you are right now? She snapped her head up. What is that supposed to mean? It means your sister just proved you intercepted her wedding invitations and admitted you hid her scholarship letter, and you're standing here checking whether people are talking about your brand. Vanessa laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. My life is collapsing in real time, Colin. He held her gaze. No, your images. That landed harder than anything else had. Because it came from him. Because it was simple. Because it was true. My father pushed his chair back and stood at last. He looked at Vanessa first. Go get the letter. She stared at him. The one from the university, he said. If it's still there, bring it here. For a second, I thought she might refuse. Then, maybe because refusal would have been one more admission in a room that had already heard too many, she turned and walked out through the hallway toward the garage stairs without another word. No one sat down again after that. The room held itself in fragments. My mother standing with one hand on the table, Colin motionless near his chair, Paige silent and pale. My father facing the doorway Vanessa had just disappeared through, as if he could will the last decade to reverse course before she came back. I put the phone face down. Then I waited. Elise moved to stand beside me. Not close enough to crowd me. Just near enough that I could feel, for the first time all evening, what support feels like when it does not ask anything in return. After a minute or two, Vanessa came back. She had a large clear plastic file box in both hands. Not just one letter. A whole container. She set it down on the sideboard with a dull, heavy sound. My father looked at it, then at her. What is that? She did not answer. He stepped forward, opened the lid, and began lifting items out one by one. Envelopes. Folders. 2 small padded mailers. A bank packet. A holiday card bundle tied with ribbon. A letter with my name on it in Aunt Elise's handwriting. Another from a recruiting office at a firm in Portland. A forwarding notice from my first apartment search after college. The scholarship letter, folded once and still inside its original envelope. My mother made a soft sound and covered her mouth again. I did not move. I had imagined this moment more than once. I had wondered whether seeing physical proof would make me angry in some fresh way, or whether it would hurt more than the missing years already had. Instead, what I felt was strangely quiet. Not numb. Just finished. My father held the scholarship envelope in both hands, as if it were breakable. How long? Vanessa looked at the floor. How long have you been doing this? She said it so softly the first time that no one caught it. He asked again. And this time she said, since high school. No one rushed to fill the silence after that. No excuses. No speeches. Just the truth, plain at last, sitting in a plastic file box under the dining room lights. My father did not raise his voice. That was what made the room feel different. If he had shouted, my mother could have called it emotion. Vanessa could have called it pressure. The cousins could have retreated into the familiar comfort of saying the holiday had simply gotten out of hand. Instead, he set the scholarship letter down on the table and began arranging the rest of the contents from the box into small, separate piles. One for school, one for work, one for housing, one for family mail. It was the first practical thing I had ever seen him do in the middle of a family crisis. I watched his hands move. Slow, methodical, almost careful enough to suggest that if he organized the evidence neatly, he might still somehow organize the years around it. My mother sat down without meaning to. She reached behind her for the chair and lowered herself into it as if her body had made the decision before her mind did. Her makeup was still perfect. Her hair was still pinned. But there was something unfamiliar in her face now. Not shock. More like the collapse of a story she had repeated to herself for so long that she had mistaken it for character. Colin stayed where he was and said nothing. Vanessa was standing near the sideboard with both arms wrapped around herself. She had stopped performing by then. The room had moved too far past impression. There was nothing left for her to manage except consequence, and consequence is not a social skill. Aunt Elise picked up one of the padded mailers and read the label. Portland, she said quietly. Recruiting office. I nodded. That was after college. My father looked up. You never mentioned a job in Portland. I never knew why they stopped responding, I said. I do now. That was the pattern at the center of everything. Not one dramatic theft. Repetition. Quiet interference. Missed openings that looked accidental when viewed alone and intentional when laid side by side. I stepped closer to the table then. There are dates on most of those, I said. Postmarks. Response deadlines. Contact numbers. Enough to build a sequence. My father gave a short, tired nod. Yes, he said. There are. He sounded like a man speaking from the far side of something he could no longer deny. My mother looked at me with wet eyes. Nora, I didn't know the extent of it. I know. She seemed startled by that answer. I believe you didn't know the extent, I said. But you knew enough. You saw evidence and chose convenience. You left me in the dark because calm mattered more to you than clarity. She looked down at her hands. For once, she did not defend herself. That mattered too. Colin finally spoke. This box has been in the house all this time? Vanessa nodded once. He asked, and you kept adding to it? Another nod. He exhaled and looked away. It was not a dramatic reaction. No accusation. No speech. Just a private recognition that the person he had built a life beside had been preserving a hidden system for years. Sometimes the quietest reactions carry the most weight because they are not for effect. They are simply the sound of belief breaking. My father straightened the top envelope in one pile and said, Tomorrow I'm calling an attorney. Vanessa looked up sharply. Dad. No, he said. You will listen now. She did. I don't know what can be repaired legally and what can't, he said. I don't know what is too old, what has a record, what still exists outside this house. But I do know this will be documented properly. Every item, every date, every explanation you have. My mother closed her eyes. He turned to me. You should not have to do that work yourself. There was regret in the sentence, but also something else. Acceptance, maybe. Too late to be protection. But no longer avoidance. I appreciated it for what it was and nothing more. I already started, I said. Back in August. I opened my phone again and brought up the spreadsheet I had built. Item type. Sender. Approximate delivery window. Known outcome. Supporting evidence. Follow-up notes. It was not emotional. It did not need to be. The facts had their own shape. Aunt Elise looked at the screen and gave the smallest nod. Good. My father studied it for a moment. You did all of this alone? No, I said, and for the first time that evening, my voice softened. Not entirely. I thought of Daniel then, of our condo in Seattle, of the way he had sat with me at the kitchen table while I cross-checked dates and made lists and decided not to second-guess myself anymore. He had never once asked whether I was sure in that skeptical family way. He had only asked what order I wanted to handle things in. That kind of love does not make noise. It makes room. My mother whispered, "Will he ever come here?" I looked at her, and the answer arrived without effort. No, she nodded as if she had expected that. My father placed both hands on the edge of the table. "Nora, I am sorry." I believed he meant it. That was the difficult part. Not because it changed anything, but because sincere regret can tempt people into reopening doors that should stay closed. So I kept my voice calm. "I know you are," I said, "but I'm not staying in contact while you figure out what this family wants to call itself now." He absorbed that without argument. Vanessa finally spoke again. Her voice was thin and strange, almost worn down to its plainest form. "So that's it?" I looked at her. "Yes," I said. "For me, it is. Not punishment. Not revenge. Just boundary." I gathered my coat, my phone, and the small pie server I had brought from the kitchen earlier. Ordinary objects. That helped. The ending of a relationship rarely feels cinematic in real life. Usually it feels procedural. You pick up your things. You say what will happen next. You leave the room. At the front door, Annalise touched my arm lightly. "I'll stay tonight," she said. "Not for them. For the record." I understood what she meant. She would photograph the contents of the box. She would label what she could. She would make sure nothing disappeared before morning. "Thank you," I said. Then I stepped outside. The desert air had turned cold. The neighborhood was quiet except for the faint sound of a television from a nearby house and the rustle of palm fronds moving against each other in the dark. I stood on the front walk for a moment with my coat folded over one arm and let the night settle around me. Then I took out my phone, opened my messages, and sent Daniel 4 words. "I'm on my way." By the time I got back to Seattle, the whole thing had already become quieter inside me. Not easier, just quieter. Daniel met me at the airport near baggage claim with my scarf in one hand and a paper cup of tea in the other. He didn't ask for a full report while we stood under bright lights with rolling suitcases passing around us. He just took my carry-on, handed me the tea, and said, "You can tell me in the car if you want." That was one of the reasons I married him. He never crowded a hard moment just because it existed. At home, I changed into wool socks and an old sweatshirt, tied my hair back, and stood in the kitchen rinsing out my travel mug while he warmed soup on the stove. The radiator clicked softly. Rain moved against the windows in a thin, steady pattern. After a week in Arizona, even the gray light outside felt kind. I told him what happened in order. Not all at once. Just plainly. The box. The letters. My father sorting the piles. My mother finally going quiet. Vanessa standing there with nothing left to shape into a performance. Daniel listened with one hand resting on the counter. When I finished, he nodded once and said, "Then it's documented." "Yes," I said. And that was the center of it for me. Not that I had won anything. Not that someone had been exposed. Only that what was real had finally been put in the right place. After years of blurred edges and missing pieces and conversations that always seemed to slide away from the point, the truth had been made orderly. A few days later, Annalise sent me a shared folder. She had done exactly what I knew she would do. Every item from the box had been photographed. Front and back when needed. Postmarks enlarged. Dates noted. A short index had been typed up and saved as a PDF. She had even included a scan of the scholarship letter and a separate note identifying which items might still matter for formal legal review. I downloaded everything, renamed the files clearly, and moved them into a private archive. Then I made tea. That was how the real ending happened. Not with a speech. Not with another call. Just me, standing at the kitchen counter on a wet Tuesday evening, labeling folders correctly, and then wiping a ring of water from the wood with the side of my hand. A week after that, my father sent one email. No long defense. No request to meet. No pressure. Just a short note saying an attorney had advised them to preserve all materials, that Vanessa had moved out of the house for the time being, and that he understood if I did not respond. I read it once. Then I archived it. My mother wrote twice after that. The first message sounded like apology mixed with confusion. The second sounded more honest, less polished. She said she was beginning to understand that keeping peace in a room is not the same thing as protecting the people in it. I did not answer that one either, though I read it more slowly. Some things can be true and still not reopen a door. By Christmas, Daniel and I had settled back into our regular rhythm. Work days, grocery lists, laundry folded warm from the dryer. The kind of life that does not look important from the outside because no one is performing inside it. On Sundays, I started taking longer walks again along the water near our building. I would stop for coffee, come home with cold hands, and sit by the window for a few minutes before doing anything else. The strangest part was not the sadness. It was the space. When you have spent years adjusting yourself around tension, peace can feel unfamiliar at first. You keep waiting for interruption. Then one day you realize the room stays quiet because no one in it is trying to take something from you. Elise moved into a small apartment 20 minutes from us in early spring. Not because of me alone, though she joked that Seattle had better bookstores and fewer fundraising luncheons. We had dinner with her on Thursdays sometimes. Nothing elaborate. Pasta, soup, bread from the market downstairs. Once, while drying dishes, she said, "You know, people think family stories end when someone finally tells the truth. Usually that's just where the honest part begins." I thought about that for a long time afterward, because she was right. A few weeks later, a woman from my office asked whether I knew a good attorney who handled document interference in family estate matters. She asked the question casually, but I recognized the look on her face. Controlled voice. Careful phrasing. A person trying to stay functional while standing too close to something old and unfair. I gave her 2 names and told her to start with timelines, not arguments. She nodded like someone who had needed exactly that sentence. Maybe that is how these things continue. Not as drama, not as revenge, just as recognition. Someone else notices a pattern. Someone else decides to stop calling damage a misunderstanding. Someone else learns that calm is strongest when it is clear. So if this story stayed with you, I'm glad you were here with me for it. If you enjoy calm, steady stories about real people finding clarity, please like the video and subscribe. And in the comments, tell me which city you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always like seeing where everyone is listening from. 2 popular stories will be on your screen next, and I think you may find something familiar in them too.